Very good afternoon. My name is Nicholas, and I'm moderating this session. I'm from Grab. And here with me, I'm very delighted to have amazing people who are in the smart mobility space, people who are changing our landscape. And I think the chit-chat we had before is going to be exciting for us to hear from them. So what I've done is I've asked each of them to do some homework, and they have dutifully done so. And each of them will take some time to just share those answers with you. And the three questions are, what is your company doing in mobility and smart mobility? What does smart mobility look like in the future for you? And the third one is, what keeps you up at night? Right? Hopefully only the good stuff. For me, it's Netflix. Yeah? So let's just turn our attention, each of them to introduce yourselves and then take away your answers, please. James?
Hi, I'm James. I'm the Director of Technology from nuTonomy. At nuTonomy, our vision is to work to improve safety, efficiency, and accessibility of transportation. And we do that by working on driverless vehicles. And we use driverless vehicles for mobility on demand. Or some of you may call it as mobility as a service. So we see the future of mobility, heavily utilizing automation as well as autonomy. If we look at Singapore is a very affluent city, and I think many affluent cities in the world face a very critical manpower shortage. The population is growing. The demand for mobility is increasing faster than the supply of demand. Faster than the supply of mobility. So at this stage, we're not even talking about the need to replace drivers, but just simply to artificially increase the supply of drivers. And we feel that driverless vehicles can help with that. They will improve safety. Most accidents, 99% of accidents are due to human error. And yes, so more efficient use of the road, more efficient use of, so the aim is to increase the utilization of transportation. And lastly, what keeps me up at night is, of course, the whole issue about safety. As you all know, that recently there's a lot of bad news on autonomous vehicles related. And so the technical challenge is huge. It is difficult. And one of the difficult challenges is to do intent prediction, to figure out the intent of other road users, whether it's pedestrians or drivers. And also, in the event where other people are breaking the law, how should your vehicle still behave? Should it still obey the law, or should it break the law to result in a safer result? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, James. All right, Shaun?
Yep, so hi, I'm Shaun. I'm the co-founder and CTO of NinjaVan. So NinjaVan is a pan-Southeast Asian logistics company. We deal with last mile logistics. So if you've seen a red van, that's us, right? So I think our company, we are in the business of transportation, right? The difference is that we move parcels instead of people. Right, so what do we do in smart mobility, right? I think for me, smart mobility is not just about autonomous vehicles. It's generally how we can apply technology to make what we do that relates to transportation more optimal and more efficient. So a very good example of what we do, right? The simple one, right? Telemetry. We collect data, lots of data from our drivers, right? Whether it's devices fitted onto vehicles, or whether, not all vehicles we own, right? So the easiest way really is to get it from the mobile apps, right? And this then goes into lots of data analysis, which we then use for stuff like, traffic forecasting, demand. So we even use data to plan, right? Based on how much demand we're going to get, depending on pickup locations, right? And how we then use this data is we try to optimize, right? What time makes sense for us to arrange pickups from our customers, right? This in turn kind of like helps the public as well, because we don't want to have a big truck, right, stuck in the middle of a huge traffic jam and contributing to the mess we have, right? So that's one of the more direct use cases. I think very classical and traditional use cases like autonomous vehicles in your warehouse. So we have these things, we call them weasels. They bring items to pick and packers, right? So people, they don't really have to walk much. Right? So what I see is that this enables a lot of people from different age groups to get jobs, right? You no longer need to have like burly men walking around the warehouse carrying heavy stuff, right? You can start to employ, you know, the older people, right? Females, right? They can just stand around, just pack, right? So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I can go on and on. Parking management systems where we optimize loading bay utilizations, right? What's the next question?
What keeps you up at night, if you ever sleep, of course?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I don't really sleep much. Well, what keeps me up at night? So I think, you know, being in a last mile customer-centric business, I think generally it's a very thankless industry where everyone always expects the best out of you. And whenever you kind of like screw up, yeah, you never hear the end of it, right? So it's really about figuring out how we can use technology, right, in a more cost-effective manner, right? Because if you look at e-commerce, I think by 2025 it's going to hit 200 billion in Southeast Asia. There's a huge market for it, right? People are getting more demanding. They want their parcels faster, right, immediate, and you know what? They are willing to pay less for it. Some even expect deliveries for free, right? But for us, cost is increasing. Labor cost is going up. You know, we pay warehouse people $3,000 a month. Levies are expensive, right? So if we have some kind of you know, robot that can replace all our warehouse stuff, the force multiplier, that would be really great, right? Yeah.
Thank you. All right, and next we have Franck.
Okay, so I'm taking care of BlueSG. So BlueSG, maybe you have heard of it. It's a electric car sharing program in Singapore. So it's a way of commuting. We are going to deploy 2,000 charging points all over Singapore, 500 locations where you can pick up a car or drop a car, and you can drive for anything like between $5 to $10 to most of the locations in Singapore. So that's a smart mobility service. Smart, why smart? I mean, what does it represent, smart? Smart is practically is to combine multiple options of commuting. You don't necessarily, someone who drives a car all days is not necessarily smart, but if you take sometime public transport and you are able to combine that with bike sharing, for instance, if you are able to combine that with Grab or any way of transport, which is going to make the best sense to you, then you are going to travel smart at a lower cost, probably faster, and eventually that's going to reduce the number of cars in Singapore. So this is what we are providing. So we are just another alternative, and this is what we believe is smart mobility. Smart mobility is to have plenty of various options, and we are one of these options that we provide to the commuters, to the residents, so to go from point A to point B. So I think the last question is that what keeps me awake at night?
Yeah.
Awake at night. It's funny because when we started to talk about this program, and that was a long time ago, we started to talk about it in Singapore in 2012. You know, when you want to start something new, you always have plenty of people who are going to explain you that it's not going to work, it's going to fail because of this, because of that. And of course, in Singapore, the first reason which we were opposed was, but you know, in Singapore, car is a status. So, I mean, people will not want to share a car. But actually, car is a status for those who own a car. But in Singapore, you have plenty of people who do not own a car. So, this level of a status. And today, the challenge that we are facing is that, of course, when we want to deploy these stations where people will be able to take a car, and that's going to be an option for them to give up their private car, but at that juncture, we need to take, let's say, 4 more parking lots in the car park. And then there is a current challenge, say, but we cannot give you 4 more parking lots because it's already very, very busy. And that's the challenge that we are facing. But very quickly, in the long run, when we are deploying car sharing somewhere, people are going to give up their car and then there will be more space in the parking, in the car parks in Singapore. So that's the current challenge. I would say it's an ambitious program, but of course deploying the stations is the most challenging part, and there is a huge demand from our customers, but only from our customers, from all the residents, to have plenty of stations, of course, near where they are and where they are going.
Thank you so much, Franck. Just a show of hands, audience engagement. Who owns a car in this room? Show of hands. Okay, so the rest of you are definitely potential customers for BlueSG, yeah, definitely.
Thank you. You'll come and I will register.
And guys, definitely not the least, we have Damien.
Yeah, my name is Damien Wong. I'm Vice President for Red Hat in the, what I call the Asian Growth and Emerging Markets region, which was actually announced today. I was, prior to this, the General Manager for Southeast Asia, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. So, to me, the topic smart mobility, what does it mean to me? For someone who travels 60 to 70% of the time in my previous job, I'm trying to figure out a smart way to tell my wife about my new job while still keeping my marriage intact. Yeah? So I think that will be my smart mobility challenge for today. Jokes aside, some of you may have heard of Red Hat. I would think most would have heard of Red Hat. Red Hat is the world's largest open source software company. You know, in terms of innovation, ranked 24th on Forbes top innovation companies globally. If you think about you know, what Red Hat has to do with smart mobility, I think first we have to look at the underpinnings of smart cities and smart mobility initiatives. If you look at the big disruptive technologies like social media, you know, cloud computing, big data analytics, IoT, machine learning, and so on and so forth. Almost all these have one thing in common. They all have their roots in the open source world. And coming from the open source community, obviously many startups had their foundings in, with the help of open source. You know, and Red Hat obviously is very proud to be associated with all these innovations, as well as the startups that are associated with these innovations. So we think that smart mobility is definitely something that will be, smart mobility is something that continues to be you know, one of the use cases of which open source innovation can support. So some have asked me, what has Red Hat got to do with smart mobility? And I like to use an analogy of perhaps Rolls-Royce engines to the aviation industry. You may see the planes, the shiny new planes and the cabins and so on and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's the engines that power these planes that actually become the foundational building blocks of the aviation industry. And we are happy being the engines that help power the smart mobility initiatives that exist across the world today. So the second question is, looking into your crystal ball, what do we see as innovations in smart mobility and what's going to drive smart mobility? And I actually told the panelists, my fellow panelists here, that our CEO famously proclaimed that planning is dead. And the reason why it is dead is because no one can honestly tell you that they know exactly what the world will look like in 5 years or even in 3 years' time, because the world is moving that quickly. And in such a rapidly and dynamically evolving environment with disruptive technologies coming in from all directions, it is very difficult to predict what the end state would be. So what we would advocate and advise is for organizations and individuals to continue to be plugged in to an ecosystem of open innovation, right? Only by doing so can you prevent yourself from being blindsided. And that's just the reality, because many famous companies have found to their own detriment that, you know, ignoring the disruptive technologies that continue to come in and disruptive business models that many of our esteemed panelists bring into play is actually a sure way of being out of existence, right? Becoming extinct. So the second thing is we think that those companies that will be successful are going to continue to be open and plugged into this ecosystem of innovation, as many of our esteemed panelists are. And then the third question is what keeps me awake at night? In the area of smart mobility, right? You know, obviously many things keep me awake at night. This is, yeah, I mean, right things, right? You know, keep me awake at night. From a smart mobility standpoint, I think what keeps me awake is the fact that for smart mobility to fully achieve its potential, you know, open standards, interoperability is going to be critical. And I think if regulators and authorities do not see this and do not acknowledge this, then I think we're going to have a challenge, because the only way that we're going to ensure that, you know, roads are safe with autonomous vehicles and, you know, the ability to predict traffic patterns and so on and so forth is really about sharing, right? It's about sharing data, it's about opening APIs, it's about the ability to make use of what is there and build upon, you know, what is made available in an open fashion. So my fear is that, you know, we do not have as much of an open mindset, and I think that will be to our own detriment as we pursue smart mobility initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, guys, I do see a lot of you putting in your questions. So I think what I'm going to do is that I may not answer every single one, but I'm seeing them. I'm seeing what is voted to the top, and I'm going to try ask those questions and weave them into my very long list of questions that I spent last night preparing. So we're going to mix those questions along with yours, yeah? So keep those questions coming, yeah? So maybe to the panelists, the one that's most popular up there you can see is the role of the government. So before this, I think a number of the panelists actually raised about the government app, parking.sg. Does everyone know about parking.sg? Yeah? So I'm a user of it. It saves me money, it saves me time. It's amazing. And some of my panelists have also agreed with me. So to any of you, maybe we can start with James first. What do you think is the role of the government? How big, how small is that in the area of smart mobility? By the way, there must be some government people here. I met some of them. Just for your information, yeah.
Of course, the role of the government at the end of the day is the interest of the population. And, you know, there are many different technologies, there are many different companies, big startups. And of course, every company will claim that their technology will enable and work and is benefit and will be beneficial for the population. I guess it's the government's duty to try to sieve through all these and to figure out, you know, which one will make sense for the population. Because what may work in India may not apply to Singapore. What may work in Malaysia may not apply to, you know, European countries and so on and so forth. That's one. Now, I'm looking at a question talking about local laws and regulations. So I guess the other thing is, you know, the government also has to see, in the case of autonomous vehicles, you know, if autonomous vehicles are on the streets, you know, are there any other implications or consequences that could arise out of it? For example, every AV company is taking a very conservative approach to design a car as safe as possible, which means that if there is a jaywalker, you know, in other words, a pedestrian who is breaking the rule and crossing the road, you know, the car is designed to stop for it. But could this also result in people abusing it, knowing that the car would stop for you, and I just simply jaywalk? Will it encourage jaywalking? So these are the kind of questions that the government has to figure out, you know, you know, like in these kind of aspects. And sometimes also the local laws and regulations may have to be updated to be in line with this. So an example would be, so in the traffic law, on the note on signaling, it states that, you know, you need to have your intention very clear, like before you change lanes. You need to give sufficient time to other users when you are signaling your intent. Yep. So the question is, what is sufficient time? Is it 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds? This is important for AV developers to know, because when you design a system, then at least you can say that at the end of the day, did I meet certain specification and requirement? Is my AV car doing the right thing? But if the laws are kind of vague, it is going to be very difficult for developers to develop a system to adhere to that.
Yep.
But on the one hand, it is hard for human drivers to drive under such strict prescription, but it is probably necessary for robots, so that it can be designed to proper specifications.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think what James has pointed out is a real issue that we face. The government is acting in the interest of its citizens, right? But there's also a situation where the citizens can game some of these things when it comes to dealing with robots on the road, right? And that's one area that we potentially think of the government's role. But maybe we should ask Franck as well, right? So Franck has amazingly deployed 2,000 charging points for his electric vehicles at BlueSG.
Not yet. Soon.
Soon, right? I'm plugging for him. So Franck, having worked closely with the government, what do you think the role of the government, what they're doing the role, does the government have a role?
The government has a key role. I mean, the government, if it's in Singapore, it's the government. If it's in the city, that's the city. But smart mobility requires a vision. It requires a global vision. It requires a vision of combining various modes of mobility and trying to get the best solution, the best options and the best solutions. So again, to offer to the commuters the fastest way to commute from A to B, the most affordable one, the seamless one. And that requires a vision. And the challenge of a government will be to aggregate this vision and at some point making compromise about specific interest. It could be the specific interest of public transport, it could be the specific interest of private car owners, it could be the specific interest of another way of mobility. If you want to really go for smart mobility, you need to find something which is the right balance between these various modes of mobility. And that requires a strong decision, that requires sometimes to make people at first unhappy, but so to offer quickly something which was going to make a better global sense and a better service. So this is a challenge of any government, by the way, not only in Singapore, but any city. And it is this global vision and to at some point being able to make some particular interest, particular influencers or stakeholders a little bit unhappy, so to offer the best to the commuters. That's how I see it.
Thank you. Shaun, do you have anything to add on working with the government and the government's role?
Well, I think the government's role is absolutely critical. I mean, I applaud the government on whatever they're doing with. I think EDB has this Smart Mobility 2030 framework. Government has set up GovTech, right? We're seeing a lot of cool stuff coming out of it. Parking.sg is one of them. But I think for us, is how fast can the government open up all these, create regulations to allow this, is something that we probably have to balance. So I think we as practitioners of these technology, we shouldn't go out and expect, hey, government, let's try to run smart cars everywhere, right, in the whole Singapore, but kind of like restrain it to a smaller area of practice. So an example is, how do you think UAV is going to, UAVs or drones, right, are going to come into deliveries, right? Everyone talks about it, but most of us, right, believe that will never ever happen, right? I'm one of those who don't believe it can happen that soon as well. But it can happen if you kind of like restrict how you're going to do it, right? So one of the things that I think I can share with you is that we might come up with some kind of a pilot where we use drones as a form of second last mile delivery, right? In urban environments, it's very difficult to get a quadcopter to land in a HDB flat, right? It's too dangerous. But what happens if you have very specific designated areas around parts of Singapore, say 5 zones, right? And you get these UAVs to send parcels from a distribution center to these 5 points and still get a traditional delivery driver to do the delivery, right? Then that becomes a lot more doable, right? And from what I can tell you, I think the Singapore government is very, very, very open to all these interesting initiatives, and I'm very glad for that.
Thank you. So I'm gonna end on this topic, and I'm gonna throw the difficult question to Damien, perhaps.
Thank you.
And all of you can jump in. So I think our panelists have kind of said that there's a role for the government because, well, frankly, the rules of engagement are held by the government through laws, correct? So maybe to start off with Damien is, do you think the government should own some of the services within smart mobility, since we are talking about mobility as a service?
Yeah. So it's $1 billion question.
Yes.
First and foremost, I want to concur that with Shaun, actually, that the Singapore government has been doing a lot to promote smart initiatives, and and I think they have really made those concrete steps that actually make it a reality for our country. GovTech and what they do with Hive, I think they do an amazing job with the kind of innovations, the kind of new apps and services that they are providing, whether they are delivering them directly, right, or co-creating them with other agencies. I think it's just wonderful. So that brings us to the question of, should government play a role or not? I think government is a key stakeholder, whichever way you look at it. We are all citizens and constituents of Singapore, whether we are enterprises or, whether we are individuals. And I think government tends to step in, and it's most effective when there are services that should be provisioned for the smooth running of the country that are perhaps not being adequately provisioned by the private sector. And I think in certain cases, it is warranted for the government to provide these services. Defense is a good example of that, right? In defense, I don't think anyone will argue that the government should be the key provider of defense and security, right? Homeland security for the country. For mobility, I think then the question is there adequate services that meet the needs of constituents? Are these services better provisioned by the private sector? What are the trade-offs? So, again, I would say that it probably is going to land somewhere in between, right? The private sector and the public sector working hand in glove to meet the needs and expectations of Singapore. But having said that, I do want to say that, this is where, and I've read ahead to some of the questions,
yes,
so it's probably not fair, totally fair, but I'm just going to jump ahead and say that some of the skills that are going to be demanded are around how do you take advantage of this infrastructure and give citizens and organizations better use of the data, the infrastructure, the assets. So I think that that's where the skills of the future are going to be, right? Developers are going to be important. People who understand that there is a change in mindset or paradigm needed, right? To an acceptance of fast failure. We spoke about it, right? Fail fast, fail cheap, fail early type of mindset, as opposed to the very traditional notion that failure is absolutely unacceptable. I think that paradigm has to rapidly change, and organizations that embrace that mindset are the ones that are going to be the ones that win. I'll give you an example. Red Hat is today a $30 billion valued company, US dollars, right? It makes us one of the largest companies in the world. What do we provide? We're the 100% open source, meaning that you can get anything that we develop in the open source community. And we sell $3 billion of that a year, US dollars, right? That's 4+ billion Singapore dollars. So how does an organization that does not protect its IP, right, still become a multi-billion-dollar giant by just ensuring that we propagate open innovation? I think that there are lessons to be learned from that, right? I know that it is counterintuitive to many But I would like to say that, this is something that I would advocate for those who are looking to develop a career. There is a career in being a developer and also working with companies that have a change in mindset. And there's a pitch. Anybody who wants to work for Red Hat, we definitely are hiring. Yeah.
Grab also. Yeah, Grab also. Oh, stress. So thank you very much. And I think let's segue a little bit to talent. Any of the panelists want to talk about talent a little bit more? I think the point that Damien really brings the point across is a change in mentality, right? Not just in the people, but the way the businesses work. How is it intuitively possible for a company not to protect this IP and still make $3 billion a year? I want to know, right? So any of the other panelists, I'm sure you deal with hiring talent as well. What do you think Singapore in the smart mobility area needs?
Yeah, so I think I completely agree that developers, right, that's probably one of the major skill sets we're all looking at. So if you rewind back 5-6 years ago, right, if you wanted to get into a school of computing course in NUS, right, you probably didn't need to get straight A's, right, maybe 2 A's, 3 A's, 1 B, or 2 A's, 2 B's, right? But today, this is computing is probably one of the most sought after courses. So what I've heard is if you can get into school of computing, you probably can get into medical school, right? Yeah. So I think that's a very important skill set. Learning, not just learning computer science. I see a lot of people with very good logical thinking skills, right? And programming is all about how do you think, how do you solve problems, right? I think machine learning, AI, that's an up and coming thing, right? And really, I think hiring is probably one of my greatest nightmares when I'm competing with companies like Nicholas, right? Right? It's crazy how people are willing to throw crazy amounts of salaries at fresh graduates coming off computing courses, right?
Thank you. All right, I think we're coming down close to the end. Unfortunately, it's a much tighter timeline. Let's look at the second question from the top, right? Multimodality of mobility. I think here within this panel alone, Franck was just sharing, he actually had customers who took a Grab to a BlueSG stand and then jump into a BlueSG and then go home, right? So that's multimodality for you. And I think what the question is to the panel, I think all of you are involved, including delivery, right, of logistics, moving of people and logistics. How do you see multimodality in your business? Because the question is, people like my company would like to be the one screen that you use across all modes. But I'm sure many other businesses also want to be the one screen. So we like to be the only screen we see on people's phones. If I walk by someone and they have a green screen, I'm very happy, right? So for you guys, who do you think how do you think multimodality plays out in each of your businesses? nuTonomy, maybe Damien, James, you can start.
I think right now we are definitely gravitating towards multimodal modes of transportation. We see bicycles, e-scooters, cars, buses, shuttle buses. In Copenhagen, 50% of Copenhagen people commute by bicycle. That's very impressive. In Singapore, we wouldn't do that because it's actually very dangerous. But the reality is, we are connected not just through roads, but pavement, but any open spaces, any traversable space, can actually be used. And of course, it would be ideal to have that one app, that can connect. Like, oh, I go from here, I take a bicycle to over here, which I take maybe a Grab vehicle to take my BlueSG vehicle to go to the train, which goes all the way to the airport, and I take a plane, to another country and so forth. Having somebody or something to plan all this out is of course ideal. So I definitely see, multi-mode of mobility is definitely, it's already happening. I think there will be more modes in the future, possibly with drones, and so on and so forth. How would we integrate all these different modes of transport for more convenience? I'm pretty sure there will be a way.
Government.
Yeah. It could be the government. or it could be, I mean, to a certain extent, Google is already doing that. You know, when you plan your trip from point A to point B, there are other startup companies doing it. And yeah, I think there will be a big enough ecosystem for a few players to play with.
Great, thank you. Shaun or Frank, you want to chip in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing parcel deliveries, right? So I've actually heard of a story where a driver, he doesn't really have his own car. He took a Grab, right, to one of our bases, collected his parcels, right, sits in his van, goes to a place, HDB cluster, parks his van there, and then takes an OFO or somewhat to start delivering because it makes more sense to him, right? So why he would do that? Because to him it's cost effective, it's the quickest way of doing things, right? So I think multimodal transport is probably something that is going to come up a lot in future, right? It's just all about convenience, which is fastest and cheapest.
Thank you. Frank, sir.
Yeah, to me, multimodal mobility and smart mobility goes together. Otherwise, if you only have one type of mobility, then it's no longer smart. I give you an example. I mean, we'd say people are asking us what is the key success factor for car sharing in a city. They say, well, there should be no public transport. On the contrary, we absolutely need public transport. And I'm going to explain you very simply why. We were asked a couple of years ago by a big city down and under, I won't name it, to deploy car sharing there. And we rejected because there was a city where there was very little public transport. If there is very little public transport, everyone has a car. If everyone has a car, no one needs car sharing. And that's by combining the various ways of transport intelligently. There are some instances where it makes more sense to take MRT. There are some instances where it makes more sense to call for Grab. There's some instances where you go just, I don't know, from something which is 5 minutes away to take a bicycle ride. And this is what is smart mobility, and that goes together with the next question, actually, which I'm reading, is that what is your thought about sharing economy? This is where people are leading, because the people, I think, are realizing that they do not want to spend a lot in owning an asset. What they are more interested in, and now this is definitely the trend that we are seeing everywhere, not only in Singapore but everywhere, is that they want to pay for the best service that they can have. So smart mobility is one of the best services that they can have, and that goes together also. I don't own the asset, I share the asset, and I make the best use of the asset, and I only pay for the fraction of what I'm using.
Thank you. Damien?
So I know we're running out of time, so just very quickly, the question of multimodality, I think it's critical, as you all have mentioned earlier, and the only way to make it happen is open standards, interoperability, and make it such that you can have perhaps citizen developers that are able to take some of this and put it together, right? That's how Grab, I guess, came about, right? You put together supply and demand using technology, and voila, you have a multi-billion-dollar company that is born out of technology. And I just will say that Red Hat is the embodiment of a sharing economy, right? We do not pay, well, we patent stuff to give to everybody, but we do not keep it all to ourselves, right? You know, whatever development we do is done in the open source community, and it is available for everyone's benefit. I think that's a good thing. But if you need it to be reliable, secure, and safe, obviously, then you need an enterprise company to stand behind it to ensure that that happens and empower those mission-critical applications. So just my plug for,
thank you so much.
Open source, open standards, and Red Hat. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end, and allow me to try summarize what I could take down with my pen and summarize the last 40 minutes. A good quote from Frank to start with: smart mobility requires a vision. Smart mobility requires a vision, and perhaps that's where the government might play a role as the aggregator of that vision. We also talked about second last mile delivery from a parcel delivery perspective, and that where government can play roles again is to plug gaps wherever the private sector can't. The other thing that Damien mentioned: fail fast, fail cheap, and our talent need to rethink the way they think about going into business. And the other thing I learned today, don't be a doctor, be a computer scientist. Right, I'm sure. We all hope for that one app. Grab hopes to be that one app, but you know, it's all out competition. And also, we still need MRT and public transport. And finally, we stay open source and keep sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Please give a big round of applause for my panelists. Thank you. Thank you.